Okay, now we're going to talk about the anomalies that are actually the Paracas skulls. The reason we're starting off with this is because I want you to note, I guess, on the right side picture where it shows that arrow going up into where the skull meets the spine of the neck. It's called the foramen magnum. And in us modern Homo sapiens, it's set right central up under the head. So there's a balancing point there. On these Paracas skulls, it's extremely pushed to the back, about right above the arrow instead of where it is now. But that's to offset the weight of the head and how it leans back. Something real weird about that, people that are archaeogeneticists have looked at this and said that I've seen boarded heads and things before, but that cannot be caused by that in any way, and that all the boarded people still have it in the middle, and they're having to rebalance their heads rather than it being offset naturally. Also, the hole, instead of being round where the spine meets the head, there is an oval shape, a little bit smaller too. And that's just one of the anomalies that have led some of these scientists that are well versed in human genetics and makeup, bone structure, and everything, have made statements to the point that these aren't human, these aren't Homo sapiens that we're talking and looking at. So they're far enough off of a difference for some people to even make that call. And what would you make that call? Well, here's looking at a normal human skull. The nose is at the very top of the screen, and we're looking down on it. And this triple point with the red line running down out of the middle is where a baby's soft spot forms and goes away, right? And this is a collection point of that. It's a normal human skull. Only problem is, on these skulls that we're looking at, it comes across in that way, and there is none on the back of a Paracas skull. The foramen magnum we were talking about before in the normal human skull is right there centered. But if you'll look at these Paracas skulls, it's set way at the back. One would say, finger of God here, one would say that it's supposed to be right here. It's shoved back that far, more than one length, if you will. It's the skull that's on the left. So there's a few variations here, and in these variations that they have here, they say there's a big difference in variation, and in ones that they find that are boarded, and even later, seemingly to mimic this, like in their royalty. And strangely, instead of having that suture running down the back of the head, they have these extra platelets that are on the back crest of the heads that show a lot of suture points that aren't normal for any Homo sapiens too. And they've taken these to actually call those Inca bones or Inca head bones, because later it's noticed that it is in the royalty. And so that's one connection showing you that they could easily thousands of years later. The reason I paused right here, and you can hardly make it out, for this is a head of a child or a youngster, but instead of the neck coming right up into the middle of it where it should be right here, you can see that it's at the back, even at that point. So it's not even something that happens as you're juvenile and get older and you try to have, move into it. These were actually born with this type of head from the start. There's no changing that. So here's Brien Forested. He's the guy that has been on the top of all of this. And if you have any type of want or wish to go down into South America and see all these cool sites, he runs tours to do so, and ones that into Egypt also. But he specializes in this. He lives in Paracas area, and he is constantly going to these sites. He has been on top of it for years, and it took him over 4 years worth of pressure after they've got it all set up to even have this go through legally through the government and be able to pass tissue samples across government lines and all this thing they've got to go through. It's a lot more hazardous than what I went through whenever I was moving fish around and so on, that had to have special permits and everything, and I saw things like this happen. Was there one day when a tiger was coming through to go to another zoo, and they were all freaky about that. Everybody there got to go look at the tiger. But L.A. Marzulli, him and a band of about 10 people he talks about in the video have been on top of doing this studies here, and he has to be well commended. We'll go in the genetics here in just a second, but first I want to show you another sample where he shows. Now this is a normal type skull, and I know it looks elongated, but he's saying that this is more of a normal person, and this has been boarded, and they say they know it's been boarded because, again, finger of God here, it's flattened at that point, and it's flattened at that point, and it's been done so as a juvenile coming up, and it doesn't have as prominent a jaw and things. And you'll notice the difference in the size of the cranial capacity of this one and the one he's about to show you in a minute. So looking at that, it's been boarded across the front like he's showing you right there in a flattened way, right? And in the back. And so the bun has just been squished up, and it squishes the cranial cavity up. And there isn't much of an expansion of a cranial cavity. Now, let's take a look at a real Paracas skull. And right off the bat, you'll notice that, well, I mean, not to say this about Brien here, but you notice Brien has a huge jaw. Very Cro-Maggish. Very X-Men and the guy that's going to take and snap your fingers. I mean, seriously, he has a prominent jaw, let's say. And let's say that all of these, you can definitely tell, have a huge prominent jaw. There's another anomaly in the way the cheekbone is formed here, and the way it runs across and everything. It's quite different. And that little point right there has made me and others think that there's some type of hybrid or a hominid hybrid or something going on, because things like that have shown up in them. But that's only to accompany that giant jaw there and the muscles that come through off of it. So these people would have had a hellish biting force if they needed to do so. Another effect you can see if we look at other ones here is that their eye sockets are about 1.5 times the size of a normal eye socket. Also, this one, it has a little dip and things done into it, sure, but this wasn't done by boarding in any way. This was born this way. They have children, they're just as big and just as done like this. It's not a process. Now, when my first child was born, she had her hair squeezed, and then it went back to normal and everything. And I don't know if you want to think that these kids get squeezed and then they wrap their head like with a sock and then keep it going or something, but the suture point shows you that that's not the same effect at all. And they don't have the soft spot and the whole 9 yards. It just doesn't work out the same. So looking at the eye sockets, you could see how big they are in proportion. And that skull is a whole lot larger. The volume of the head is a whole lot larger. Goes back much further. Now, look there on the back, and he's fixing to talk about these. All of these scribbles here, we don't have that. Inca royalty are shown to have that, and they're called Inca bones. And this is apparently where it came from, and so they were the original royalty thousands of years leading up into the Incas or something. They ran that area. They were the rulers of that area and brought up more primitive people that were already there and got them all going. And how does that work? I mean, that's just pretty strange. Don't want to catch him at a word point here, but I've done it 3 times in a row now. Now he looks sleepy. But just to look at that head on right there, you can see how big the eyes are, how prominent the jaw is, compared even to his. I wish he's a little separated out there, but they have a real prominent jaw. And so the first examples that they started to give was something like this. And even though they give them grayish green eyes, they were trying to make them look like Aztecs or people of the mountains right there, and do some type of blending thing, if you will, or something along that line. But there's this artist guy that's here, and so he sent him a bunch of the skulls and multi-pictures of them, and he's a forensic artist that's able to draw pictures and recreate skulls in the way that they would have looked. And strangely, whenever he got to look at all of these and put those out, he comes up with something that looks a little bit different. Like off this skull, this is probably the way the guy looked. Here's a girl here, and that's off this skull, and all the little points it's working off of it and so on. Strangely, guys, I don't know if you ever watched old Saturday Night Live or ever saw anything, but whenever I was a kid, there were the coneheads. God, I almost laughed when I was saying it and couldn't get it out. The coneheads. You remember? They even had a daughter. It was Beldar and Primat. They were from a small town in France called Remoulac. You remember that crap? They had a daughter. Her name was Connie. She was a cool hippie chick. And her parents would consume mass quantities, like a pack of cigarettes at a time, or a 12-pack of beer, or 3 dozen eggs, things like that. And I remember there was an episode where she was going out with Frank Zappa, which didn't seem strange to us at all when we were kids, knowing Frank Zappa. They had 2 sets of teeth, too, which is, kind of goes along with all these tales of these giants and these big-headed people and red-headed people. Well, let's get into the genetics here as we show a few more of these pictures here for, I guess one of the main anomalies of this situation is that, looks like we're looking at a baby alien and his dad or something, doesn't it? Seriously. So, Amerindians are all supposed to be blood type O. All of them. 100%. Regardless, over time it blended out. If they had anything into them, the Siberian Asians, if you will, ended up becoming the Amerindians, and they were all blood type O. The only thing is that they gave them 12 samples. Well, they gave them 18 or 19 samples, but only 12 of them became viable out of that. And none of those are O. A and B. And that doesn't fit the normal mold, but 4 of the 12 were haplogroup B, which is common in Amerindians. They're supposed to have A, B, C, and D, and that's it. Although we've shown the Windover Bog people were haplogroup X, and that shows people from Lower Anatolia and the Holy Land at one time. So you would call them a portion of the ancient Canaanites, if you will. And they show up to be in Windover Bog somehow. And so that connection is weird, whether you want to say they ran all the way up into the Americas and bred with somebody and disappeared. But that haplogroup was major whenever that happened. But if 4 of the 12 were, what are the others? Well, the major group that seems to be showing here in mtDNA and stuff, and a couple of ydDNA they're showing is U2E. So someone could probably help me out on exactly that, but that's Upper Anatolian and Caucasus area, if I'm not mistaken. H, H1A, and H2, K, and J. Now those are all areas around the Black Sea area and the Caucasus region and northern Anatolia and so on, and ancient DNA that we've tested from there a few thousand years ago. And ironically, this seems to also be the region and the hot spot for people that have elongated heads in ancient time. If you look into this, the people that had elongated heads, other than these Paracas people on Earth, the second most population where it's all happened at, was there in one little group of people. And it didn't seem like it was all of them. So that's kind of strange. So another thing that he noticed himself while he's been studying this, and somebody brought up, here's this young child that's over here, given that idea. And someone would think, man, they should have made them all look like Incas, but now knowing that Mark must have been trying to say these are space aliens. No, Mark's working off of natural face structure and so on, and they pretty much look like this, and bigger eyes like that, and elongated heads like that baby is showing right there. And now that we look at genetics, Mark doesn't look like he's too far off here. All these little pictures here are done by Mark LaPlume back from 2016, 2018, 19. There's a site called Root Races that he ends up drawing pictures of and old archaea stuff. He's kind of well known for his depictions and his recreations and so on, and so he's taken a lot of these skulls, like this one over here, and recreated it. That's just too far off. We can't hardly see what some of the... So by taking these and doing regular forensic type of work, this one that you can see that's got a cropped red head here, very distinctive, might have looked more like this. Now another anomaly in the genetics, other than the U2E, H, H1, H2, K, and J, which are not Amerindian haplotypes, they're also found around the Crimea area, and by the way, a couple of those are concentrated around still to this day. But they're commonly found in the Black Sea and Caucasus region, which we said also is a hub for elongated heads. And genetics also shows a penchant for dark red hair. Yeah, we got that. And green eyes. Oh, we couldn't tell their eyes from a skull, but genetics, you can punch it through on there and then go, well, this is probably what their eyes look like. And also said they had light skin, so all of a sudden, bam. Now, it looked like 4 of them might have been mixed, because they have haplogroups B, which is common in Amerindians and in a lot of the Inca, and the people even today. But those other ones really wouldn't have been until the Spanish showed up And those Spaniards had some of that genetics going on. And in a modern day, later day, of course, people coming in there might. But at this time now, this totally blows off the idea what we would think of as another people that were Amerindians. Another person here, not this Mark LaPlume, I don't think, the name doesn't strike a bell when I think of it, did a recreation of two different Wari skulls, and they thought that he was incorrect whenever he did the pictures of him from what they did. And then he found out, well, that just gave him the skulls. What they did is a recreation of the skull. But when they find out that the guys were, one was redhead and one was blonde, he was like, what the hell? You know, well, oh, they were Amerindians, so I can't draw them like that, but that's the way that they really would have looked. I'm a forensic guy, so I didn't know I was supposed to be gearing towards your agenda here. And you were expecting me, next time when I do it, try to tell me what you really want me to draw a picture of, and I'll just do that rather than do the work that I'm supposed to be doing. Isn't that sad? And it would be sad if it was the only one, but they did it to another lady. And much like whenever they came out with a recreation of Nefertiti, and people were all saying that that was Karen and the girl at the secretary and some white lady, and they did her, I think they called her Heidi or something. Like, we wanted you to recreate this people, ancient Wari cloud people, and we were expecting X, Y, or Z, and you ended up giving us N here because all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you give us something that looked more Heidi-ish than we were expecting. So that's kind of odd. Whenever you just can't please the people and their expectations, whenever you're given a job and they pick somebody that's actually an expert at things like that. But the cheekbones are different than any Homo sapiens, as I was saying. They have that Inca bone effect. They don't have the suture running down the back. The foramen magnum is in the wrong place and misshaped, but to balance their head, which is different. There's enough freakouts here to turn around and start calling this an alien hybrid or something weird like that, but the genetics don't necessarily show that. It's showing that they're people from the Black Sea region. There's nothing that we can find to this day, the way we look at genetics, that we can find that, yeah, they had something here. Yeah, they have the elongated head gene. We haven't really figured that one out. Eye sockets up to 50% larger than a normal range. Again, there was cone heads when I was a kid. Strangely, things like that, like I used to say, are always around you. Like some of these things were like, what are you doing showing that off? It's just so, yeah, album covers, all kinds of stuff when I was growing up when I was a kid was just really telling that people just seem to be on top of it, knowing far too much. Here's another idea, that suture. So, again, here's Brien Forested, and he runs these tour groups now, extra, because people are interested and want to see it, and if you want to go, I don't know how much it is, but they put it all together pretty reasonable, and he's a reasonable guy. He's not trying to rip anybody off or anything. And you, of course, get a tour with somebody that's into it deeply, where you wouldn't really have that in any way. Believe me, I've gone on a normal tour guide thing, and they tell you these normal little things and stuff, and you can answer the questions, but they're never going to lead you down a path of anything that this man will talk about. Again, I have to commend him for going through the trouble of doing this for all of humanity, I guess, you would say. But there's a vid on the Paracas skull anomalies and stuff, and anything more comes out on it, I'll be on top of it and let y'all know. But I wanted to do another one here on it. Felt like my last one was lacking, sucking, and I didn't have all of the genetics down because he put it out in this later video in the section rather than just the two I mentioned before. Let me know what you think about all this down in the comments. Oh, one more thing. He also found out that there are date palms. And so his hypothesis is that these people left out of the Black Sea area whenever they started to get run out by others, which we'd probably consider as Scythians or something, and got pushed down into the Mediterranean and out the Red Sea and out and took off, but in the process grabbed some date palms, because in South America, if you in the whole area there where he's at in Paracas, that's pretty much the hub. It's the only area where we really find date palms, and go from there and they peter out down near the Nazca area and just above Paracas there, but they're real concentrated. And the locals really don't actually do anything with them. They don't use the plant or even really the fruit that he says, so that's kind of strange too. Anyhow, peace.